Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia, this is Minerva, and today we are announcing Jane Austen July. Minerva, what are you doing? You haven't even announced anything yet. I've got to do everything myself in this house. If you're familiar with this channel, then you're also familiar with Jane Austen July, and you're familiar with my Jane Austen July announcement videos. I'm going to tell you about Jane Austen July, I'm going to tell you about the challenges, and I'm going to mention a few books that you might enjoy, that I enjoyed in the past, or that I've heard other people have enjoyed that fit these challenges. However, this is not going to be nearly as structured as my co-host's announcement videos, so do check those out as well. I am sure there's going to be stuff in their announcement videos that I'm completely going to forget to talk about. Jane Austen July is an annual month-long readathon that takes place in the month of July, in which we celebrate all things Jane Austen. I'm trying to think of how long this has been going for. I want to say that this is either the 5th or 6th year. I'm fairly certain it's my 3rd year hosting it, together with the aforementioned Katie from Books and Things and Marissa from Blatantly Bookish. Both of their channels are going to be linked in the description box, and their announcement videos, watch them. These announcement videos tend to be on the longer side sometimes, so let's get right into the challenges. We have 7 challenges. They are pretty much the same every year. We've made one small change last year, so if you haven't taken part in this for a while, then, you know, be prepared for one small change to one of the 7 challenges. Our first challenge is always to read one of Jane Austen's main 6 novels, the Jane Austen canon. And this is in fact the only challenge that you need to participate in order to have officially done Jane Austen July. You don't need the other 6, you just need to do this one thing, and that is read one of Jane Austen's main 6 books. These books are, and I never write this down because I'm always trying to see if I can mention them in chronological order. So the first novel was completed, but not the first one that was published, was Northanger Abbey. In my opinion, the most underrated of Jane Austen's novel. It's fun, it's funny, it's short, it's bitingly satirical, and it has the hottest priest in Jane Austen's work. Then there is Sense and Sensibility. This is more gentle, more of a cottagecore vibe to it, about first loves and second loves, and all set in the Devonshire countryside. And contrasted to the bustle of London. Not one of my favourite novels, but the more I reread it, the more I appreciate it. Then we have Pride and Prejudice, the most popular Jane Austen novel for a reason, my personal favourite, as close to a perfect book as any novel from any century that I've read can get. Love it. If you haven't read Pride and Prejudice, that is the Jane Austen novel that I always recommend people start out with. Dare to be a basic bitch about this, read Pride and Prejudice if you haven't read it yet. Then, and this is the one that I'm pretty sure I get wrong about half of the time, I think next we have Mansfield Park, which I dislike. I made a video about my dislike of it. I realized that this is a love it or hate it novel, and the fans of Mansfield Park really love it, and fair play to them. It is objectively a good book. It certainly has one of the most outstanding protagonists in Fanny Price. It touches upon topics that other Jane Austen novels don't, such as the working classes. It's worth a read if you haven't read it yet. I'm kind of just making peace with the fact that I just don't enjoy it. Next, I think next anyway, is Emma, and that is my second favourite. It's a lot like Pride and Prejudice in tone, but not as tightly written as Pride and Prejudice, and yet Emma, another outstanding protagonist, is very unique in her unlikability. It's a story that has all of the Jane Austen elements that we know and love. It has comedy, it has romance, it has drama. It's a long novel, but very much worth it. What am I missing? Persuasion. Persuasion, often considered Jane Austen's most mature novel, features a positively middle-aged protagonist of 27, and it's a more melancholy novel overall. It is about second chances and about regret, and in that regard it really is more mature than her other works. It's the sort of novel that doesn't woo you immediately, but that really claws its way into your heart the more you read it and the more you reread it, and it has one of the most, if not the single most romantic scene in all of Jane Austen's work. So that was the first challenge. Let me know which book you are going to read for that challenge. And let me also tell you about our read-along, our official read-along of Northanger Abbey that is going to take place between the 1st and the 2nd. The 1st and the 2nd, yeah, we're speed reading Northanger Abbey. No, it's going to take place between the 1st and the 10th of July. Northanger Abbey, as I mentioned, is a short book. It's very well doable in 10 days. And if you haven't read it yet, because like I said, it is often one of the lesser mentioned of Jane Austen's work. If you enjoy the funny side of her and the satirical side of her, then definitely join in with the readathon. I am probably going to listen to the audiobook, and there is one that's read by Juliet Stevenson, I think, and that's probably the one that I'm going to pick for that. And the read-along is taking part in a Goodreads group, which I will link in the description box. This means I have to find my Goodreads password again, because I swear I haven't logged into Goodreads in like 7 months. If you send me a friend request at any point in the last year and I've ignored it, then sorry about that. I am going to find my password, I'm going to log into my Goodreads account again, and I will take part in that readathon. Read-along. I will take part in that read-along. The second challenge, and this one's one for the Jane Austen connoisseurs, is to read something by Jane Austen that's not one of her 6 main novels. Because apart from that canon, Jane Austen also wrote loads of other things. There are some more popular unfinished novels, such as Sanditon, which has had a recent series adaptation that I haven't seen yet, but is quite popular. There is her early epistolary novel, called Lady Susan, which I read for the first time last year because it was the official group read in last year's Jane Austen July, and I loved it. And there are loads and loads of juvenilia, so short stories that she wrote before her main writing period, that she wrote either as a girl or a young woman. And I am completely unfamiliar with any of those works, which is why I am so happy to announce that her juvenilia is our second group read-along. This is going to take place from the 11th of July to the end of the month, and there is an official list of works. And I want to redirect you here to Katie's video, because she put together a list of links where you can read these stories for free online if you don't want to buy a hard edition of that. I haven't yet decided whether I'm going to read it online or whether I'm going to splurge out on a book that contains these stories. But either way, I'm super excited to dive into that. If other booktubers are to be believed, then her juvenilia are absolutely hilarious and worth reading. And I'm excited to discover a new Jane Austen, which doesn't happen that often. Challenge number 3 is to read a non-fiction work about Jane Austen or her time. And this is the one that I struggle with the most. And that's because in my spare time, I don't enjoy reading non-fiction. I have read and enjoyed some works in this category, most notably What Matters in Jane Austen by John Mullen, which is a very easily digestible sort of analysis of some aspects of Jane Austen's novels. Bit of a warning here, do not read this book unless you have read all of Jane Austen's novels and Lady Susan, because works that discuss her work by necessity spoiler it. So just be aware of that. A book that I was quite excited for, that I read 2 years ago for Jane Austen July, is The Time Traveller's Guide to Regency Britain by Ian Mortimer. And I have many complex thoughts about this book. I made an extensive 20-minute review of it that just tells you how much I had to say about this. So I'm giving you a sort of recommendation with a caveat. Maybe watch that video first before you decide whether to read it or not. In theory, it's a wonderful overview of Regency Britain as seen from the point of view of the time traveller, meaning that it's a more down-to-earth people's history of the Regency that talks a lot about the everyday stuff that many other history books just don't mention. On the more academic side of things, I can recommend Amanda Vickery's books. So if you are after something more brainy, then I can recommend her Behind Closed Doors at Home in Georgian England, for example. Challenge number 4 is to read, I'm looking at my notes here, I should know this by heart by now, is to read a retelling of a Jane Austen book or a work of historical fiction that is set in Jane Austen's time. This is the slight amendment to the 4th challenge that I think we did for the first time last year. Previously, this challenge was just about retellings, but we have expanded that to include historical fiction. Let me break this challenge down into 3 types of books that you can read for this challenge. So the first type that you can interpret this challenge as is what I like to call Jane Austen fan fiction. This is basically books like Longbourn by Jo Baker, The Other Bennet Sister or Charlotte, books that are set in the world of Jane Austen's books and that expand upon that. Something like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies would also fall into that category. So these are books that are set within the world, the universe of, say, Persuasion, but that are either spin-offs, sequels, prequels, or tell parallel stories or alternate versions of events in those books. I have to be honest, this is a type of book that I've typically not enjoyed a whole lot. So even the books in that category that other people really love, that come highly recommended, I've generally not enjoyed them much. They inevitably fall short in comparison with Jane Austen. The second way you can interpret the fourth challenge is to take a modern retelling. So this is a type of story where an author has taken a Jane Austen story as the jumping off point and then has transplanted it into a different time and place. A really popular example of this is Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding, though not one that I can recommend unless you want to relive the horrors of 1990s chick lit. And just saying that made me shudder. I'm so glad we don't use that term anymore in publishing. There are many more worthy modern examples of this type of modern retelling. One that I enjoyed a lot was Where the Rhythm Takes You by Sarah Das. This is a young adult retelling of Persuasion. Brilliant retelling set in modern day Tobago. I really enjoy those kinds of books, so I'm going to have a look and see what recent examples there are, what recently published books there are, because Jane Austen is just a never-ending well of inspiration to authors, and therefore it's no surprise that every single year there are new books to pick from for this particular category. The third type of book that you can choose for the fourth challenge is historical fiction set in or around Jane Austen's lifetime. This is the broadest category because any historical fiction that's set during that time counts. I don't really know what else I can say about this because it's such a broad category. Anything, including a large amount of, for example, Victorian fiction, because a lot of Victorian fiction is set in that late 18th, early 19th century. My camera battery is running out, so I'm going to swap this out. See you back in an instant, presumably with a slightly different camera angle. We are back with a fresh battery pack, and I hope that that lasts till the end of the video. Let's move on to the fifth challenge, and that is to read a book written by a contemporary of Jane Austen. Now, we're not super strict with the dates here, so you can go plus or minus a few years. Use your own discretion here. If there's a book that you really want to read from 1821, you just have at it, it's fine. I feel like this is the challenge that people struggle with the most, and that's because they're used to reading Jane Austen, then they pick up a book by one of her contemporaries and find that it's just not as good. It's okay, you can admit it, they can't hurt you. Though I wouldn't put it past Mariah Edgeworth to haunt you in your sleep. Sweet dreams. I've read quite a few books by Jane Austen's contemporaries, and I will link all relevant review videos that I've made about them in the description box. But if you are new to reading Jane Austen's contemporaries, or if you have been disappointed by those books that are often mentioned as influences on Jane Austen or comparisons to her work, or books that have a similar sort of premise to what might sound familiar to you, if you've had a disappointment like that, or if you're completely new to early 19th century non-Austen literature, then my biggest recommendation really is to read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It is an enduring classic, and though it's nothing like Jane Austen, it has the same quality of being... What? Do you have a lot to say about Frankenstein? No, because you can't even read. You don't know what I'm talking about, do you? It has the same quality of sounding more modern than it is, and therefore I think you will enjoy that. However, if you are feeling brave and you want to give something a go that's a little closer to Jane Austen in terms of premise and setting, then you might want to read something like Belinda by Mariah Edgeworth or Marriage by Susan Ferrier. But bear in mind, even though the premise, the setup, the setting is similar to Austen's, the way these books are written is entirely different. The way that they are structured and the prose and everything about them, it will be unfamiliar. And Abby, come on. I can't remember what I was trying to say. Poetry, that's another thing you can read. I can't say much about poetry because I am uncultured like that. However, people who enjoy poetry very much tell me that the early 19th century has rich pickings in terms of romantic poetry. So maybe this is something I want to give a go this year, but maybe this is also something I say every single year for every single readathon. I'm going to try poetry this time, and then I don't. Anyway, poetry exists. You'll definitely have to turn to other people for recommendations in that regard. Another option that I feel like is not often talked about is non-fiction from the period. So a lot of things that people write books about were things that in the post-Enlightenment age started to be the subjects of books, whether that is plants or cooking or politics. One book that I have read from the time is Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, which is an influential proto-feminist work. It's incredibly dry and yet interesting if you are interested in that sort of stuff. I would pretty much suggest looking into the history of your favorite topic for non-fiction books and seeing if there is something from the early 19th century, because likelihood is there is, for something a bit more out there in your Jane Austen July TBR. The final two challenges are, as always, viewing challenges rather than reading challenges. Challenge number 6 is to watch a direct screen adaptation of a Jane Austen book. There are so many to choose from and everyone has got different favourites, but let me just go through some of my favourites. So for Northanger Abbey, the 2007 one is the most popular and it is fun and it's well made, but I'm still secretly hoping that in the near future we'll get an adaptation that really plays up the ridiculous, the satirical, the funny, the comedy of Northanger Abbey. That's my hope. For Sense and Sensibility, I enjoy the 2008 miniseries, which I believe was done by the BBC, but the 1995 film adaptation will always have my heart. I love that film, even though it is far from the most faithful adaptation of the book. When it comes to Pride and Prejudice, I'm 1995 miniseries all the way. I will not accept any dissenting opinion on this, so there. Mansfield Park, I'd rather pretend didn't exist. For Emma, we are truly spoiled though. The most recent cinema adaptation was objectively great and gorgeous, you know, Emma with a full stop. Beautifully made. But my personal favourite is the miniseries from, I think, 2009. When it comes to Persuasion, both the 1995 and 2007 adaptations are well worth a watch. Last year's Netflix adaptation, on the other hand, was an unmitigated disaster. And the only good thing that has come from it is that the video I made about it has become my 3rd most watched on the channel. I also want to give a shout out to the 2015 adaptation of Lady Susan with the confusing title Love and Friendship with Kate Beckinsale. Wonderful, good stuff. The 7th challenge is to watch a modernised screen adaptation of a Jane Austen book. And there are 2 types of film that fall into this category. The first one is a modern screen adaptations. So there's classics in the genre like Clueless or Bride and Prejudice or, of course, Bridget Jones's Diary. One that I watched last year, that I think also came out last year, was Fire Island, which is a adaptation of Pride and Prejudice set around a group of 5 gay men who go to the gay resort on Fire Island and Pride and Prejudice happens. It's incredibly faithful to the novel while also being true and authentic in its setting. And you can tell that the people who made it really loved and understood Pride and Prejudice and turned that into a truly wonderful film that I haven't really seen talked about as much as I think it deserves. You can also, of course, watch one of the many web adaptations of Jane Austen books that are on this here YouTube, such as the absolute classic that is the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which I believe recently celebrated its 10th anniversary, and then all of the adaptations that followed in its wake. Too many to mention. One that I want to recommend that I finished watching quite recently was Rational Creatures. This is a YouTube adaptation of Persuasion. It's It's really wonderfully done. If you watch through the whole playlist, it comes in at, I think, just around 2 hours, so you can totally watch it in an evening. And it really is a wonderful modern take on Persuasion. But there's also a second way you can interpret this 7th challenge, and that is to take it a little more loosely. Think of it in a less literal way. There are some films that take inspiration from Jane Austen without being a direct adaptation or a direct retelling of one of her novels. One that I watched for the first time recently was Austenland, which is an absolutely outrageous rom-com set in a Jane Austen-themed all-inclusive resort. It is, and I say this with a lot of love, it is absolute trash, but highly entertaining. In a similar vein, there is a miniseries called Lost in Austen from quite a few years ago. I think it came out about 15 years ago on Channel 4. But if you can get hold of it, that is equally as hilarious, and this is about a Jane Austen fan who gets sucked into the world of Pride and Prejudice, and so suddenly she finds herself in the middle of her favourite novel. Also hilarious. I should really rewatch this, but I don't even know where you can get hold of that these days. Anyway, there's lots of really fun films, TV shows, YouTube series that are in some way or another inspired by Jane Austen, and pick your favourites, try out something new. Curious to see which ones you pick for this year's Jane Austen July. I have not decided yet on my TBR and on my to be watched. I'm going to sit down now and have a little think about that, about what I want to read and watch this Jane Austen July. Either way, I'm super excited about this, as I'm sure you can tell by the length of this video and the speed of my talking. As I've said, this is not my first time doing Jane Austen July, and you will find all of the previous year's playlists in the description box. So if you want to get in the mood, if you want to see what sort of content I've made previously about Jane Austen, then go and check those out. And if I've forgotten to mention anything else, it's also in the description box. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!